So there are a few differences between, or what distinguishes a route port from a designated port. So when we talk about route ports mostly will be on route bridges. Like I said from previous lessons, I said route port is more like your ambassador to a place. And so if you're an ambassador of a country and you are resident in a different country, you cannot be an ambassador of maybe UK and live in UK. You have to travel to a different country. So basically, if this is the route bridge, then the route port, which is more like the ambassador to the route bridge, cannot be on the route port. It has to be on a non-route bridge. So meaning a different country or a different device other than the route bridge. Now, normally, we have only one route port on a non-route bridge. There's only one. So that's why earlier on in our example, we realized that we have this one and we said this port to become the route port and this port to become the route port because there's only one. It's like saying there's only one ambassador of a country for a particular country in a different country. So you cannot have ambassador of RB, two ambassadors of RB here. You have one of them here, maybe in a different country, you send another ambassador. So you cannot have the same ambassador. So you cannot have one country having two ambassadors of a particular country. Now for designated ports can be on any device. It can be on the route bridge. So every port on the route bridge is a designated port. So here is a designated port, here's a designated port. But also on a non-route bridge, we can have a designated port as well. So designated ports are not just limited to route bridges. Designated port can be also on non-route bridges. When it comes to the route port, the port with the least cost from the non-route bridge will become the route port. So we'll consider which one will lead to this one with the shortest cost. That will become the non-route bridge. So non-route port. Oh, sorry, did I say non-route port? The route port. Also, if you look at the designated ports are just any port which has the lowest cost within the spanning tree. So that's why we have this one, which is not on the route port. So on the non-route bridge, but we're still having them as designated port. But also we decided to choose one of it from this guys as well. So when we're looking at designated ports, we're looking at the architecture in general, not just a particular device. Also, there's only one, like I mentioned, on the route port. There's only one route port on the non-route bridge. And then for designated ports, you can have multiple on any device, whether it's a route bridge or non-route bridge. You can have some on the non-route bridge. You can have some on the route bridge as well. Another thing is that you cannot have a route port on a route bridge. I've said this so many times because you cannot have your ambassador residing in your country as well. And all ports of route switches are designated ports I mentioned earlier. So there's no way a port in a route bridge will become any other port apart from designated ports. Another thing is that, so basically, if there is a route port, one end of the, so basically, if let's say something happens on the route, non-route bridge, so basically, so this example, so if there's a route port here and a route port here, now there's no way if there's a route port here, this port to be blocking. There's no way, unless something happens. But if something happens on this guy and this guy loses connectivity, then it means that technically this guy is no more the route bridge. But there's no way, it's going to be highly impossible because once it happens like that, then it means that this guy may lose its ability to become route bridge and another person may become a route bridge, which is something that spanning tree will take care of. So like I said, it will either be anytime you have an on-route port, the opposite port will either be a designated port or a non-designated port, but it will not be a blocking port, meaning it has to pass traffic. We'll see reasons why we're saying that later.